Joining me now is Stephen Moore. You guys know him. He served in the Trump administration, a former economic advisor to the president, co-founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity in his book, Trumponomics, Inside the America First Plan to Revive Our Economy. Stephen, always good to see you. You've been very vocal about this. Give me the lay of the land, because when Biden came out and said, well, we did these sanctions. These sanctions aren't going to work. Jen Psaki is saying that they got a carve out, essentially, is the way I understand it, for any kind of Russian crude. We get about 7% of Russian crude from, if we had allowed Keystone XL to continue and we'd been having that delivered to North American markets and the international market, we could have easily have made that several times over, as I understand it. What would it look like? What would what would this, because it's a national security issue, if Biden unleashed domestic production, greenlit Keystone XL, restored that agreement with Canada, and then stopped crude sales, or at least the importation of that from Russia, and helped out our allies, what would that look like? Give us that picture.
Hi, Dana. Good to be with you. Well, before I answer that question, I want to explain to your listeners what's going on with the financial markets over the last 24 hours, because it's been an incredible roller coaster ride, and a lot of people are confused about what's happening. And this actually pertains to your question. Okay, so back 24 hours ago, when the stock market crashed, when the Russians moved into Ukraine, the Dow was down by about 850 points at midday. Mm-hmm. And then Biden goes out and gives this speech. And in the speech, what Biden didn't do was talk about any kind of sanctions that would be related to the primary way that the Russians fund their military operations, which is through the oil and gas money. So what I had hoped that Joe Biden would say, what he should have said is, look, I made a mistake. He could have said, presidents make mistakes. I made a mistake. We should have been producing as much oil and gas as we could. We should have built the pipeline. I shouldn't have discontinued it. And we're going to do that now. That's what he should have said. But instead, he didn't say that. And to make matters worse, these sanctions, which he said are the strongest sanctions we've seen in 25 years, I agree with the sanctions, but they weren't tough enough, Dana. And what they didn't affect was the energy markets. And by the way, Wall Street wanted that. All Wall Street cares about is that the oil keeps flowing, right? And they didn't want the higher oil prices. And so as soon as he said, well, I'm not going to put any kind of controls on the Russian exports of oil, the market went up, because that meant that we would still have relatively inexpensive oil. So my point is that Wall Street and the Biden administration were sort of on the same side of this. And what's really frustrating about this is essentially what Biden's strategy is it's okay for Russia to produce oil and gas, but it's not okay for the United States to do that.
He's harsher on us than Russia.
And I find that to be not just stupid, but unpatriotic.
Yeah, it seems like we have sanctions from the Biden administration on domestic production that are harsher than the sanctions against Russia.
Exactly. What Biden is, that's a good way to put it, Dana. He has imposed sanctions on our own oil and gas industry rather than Russia's. And by the way, Russia gets 40% of its GDP from oil and gas. And who do you think owns those oil fields? Putin does. I mean, Biden's going to make Putin the richest person in the world. And so you can tell I'm frustrated, because none of these policies make any sense. And I guarantee you, having worked for Donald Trump, this is exactly the opposite of what Trump would have. Trump would have basically said, we're going to drill, baby, drill. We're going to use our oil, our gas, our coal, our hydropower, whatever power we've got. We're going to build LNG terminals so we can be exporting it to Germany and France and Spain and Italy, so they're not dependent on Russia. In other words, what I'm saying is Biden, when it comes to energy policy and national security policy, seems to be making every misstep.
Yeah, and remind us on this, talking with Stephen Moore, because you were there in the Trump administration when he started implementing sanctions against Russia, even early into his term. And I remember the way it was described. I think certain Democrat lawmakers said that it was a form of economic warfare, what Donald Trump is doing, and they were so harsh. And from what I understand, now, I may be wrong on this, but when I was reading what the sanctions were that Biden was implementing, they weren't even as tough or as restrictive as what Trump had initially levied against Russia, correct?
Yeah, well, this is another interesting point you're making. So do you remember, I mean, first of all, the first 2 years of Trump's presidency, CNN and the media and all the Democrats were Russia collusion, as if, the Trump was in the hip pocket of Putin. Well, it turns out that the person who's in the hip pocket of Putin is Biden, because Biden is actually, everything he's doing is benefiting. By the way, let's not forget, sorry to go off on another tangent here, let's not forget the other major player in the world right now, which is China, of course, and they're loving life right now. I mean, you've got, and China has if any, remember, who was the only world leader who showed up at the Beijing Olympics?
Right, Putin.
President Xi.
Yeah.
President
Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin,
together.
They were the only world leaders that were there.
Yeah, so you've got this kind of Sino-Chinese a pact going on, which is very scary for the world. And incidentally, Dana, I want to say this as well. The Europeans are not blameless in this either.
Right.
I mean, the Europeans played right into the hands of the Russians. I remember when I was working for Trump and we would go to these international meetings, and the Europeans acted like they were more in alliance with the Russians and the Chinese than they were with us. And I had warned, I think on your show a few months ago, Europeans better watch out. They are held hostage now to Putin and the Russians for their energy.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what has happened.
Exactly what has happened. We're talking with Stephen Moore, who was an economic advisor in the Trump administration. That's a really good point, because even before NATO does anything, I'm like, where's the European Union? Because all of these Baltic states, these are EU members. These are EU member states. And I know there's some in the Balkans that are going through the application process. But the fact that the EU, what are they good for if they're not standing up for this? Because this also affects them economically as well.
Well, I'm so frustrated with the Western European. By the way, the Eastern Europeans are all on our side on this, right? They've been occupied by the Soviet Union. So there's a divide between the Eastern European countries like Hungary and Poland and Czechoslovakia and Latvia. They are basically saying, Russia is dangerous, whereas it seems like the Western Europeans have historical amnesia, that they've forgotten about how dangerous the Soviet Union was. And so, look, the solution to this problem is for the United States to produce our oil, our gas, our coal. We have more of this than any other country. I remember back when Trump was president, we were filling up those tankers with liquefied natural gas, and we were shipping it to Europe. And that has almost completely discontinued. In fact, Dana, I mean, this administration, I can't believe the dumb things they do. Just 2 weeks ago, their Federal Energy Regulatory Commission basically put in these new regulations that are going to make it very difficult for the United States to ever build another LNG terminal.
You made a really good point, because I think it was, and I'm looking through my notes here, because I think this, I'm trying to remember if this was a piece you wrote when you were, because you mentioned the LNG terminals and you were mentioning sending this to parts of Europe. We had the capacity, and I could be wrong, and I could be attributing something I read or making it up, attributing it to you, but we had the capacity not only to be self-sufficient and self-sustaining and handle, because energy is national security ourselves, but we really also had the domestic capacity to do that for all of these European nations too, correct? Yes,
absolutely. I mean, look, Dana, we have at least 250 years worth of natural gas. The fracking revolution, which the left hated, right? The whole shale oil and gas revolution. And by the way, that was economic stimulus for West Virginia and Ohio and Pennsylvania. It was good paying jobs. And it completely revived the economy of these places. And basically Biden came in and shut it down. The left has always hated, quote, fracking because it's some kind of evil process when it actually made the United States not just energy independent. What Trump used to say to me is, Steve, I don't want to make America energy independent. I want to make America the energy dominant country in the world. And we were on the path to that. And now you've got this, I'm sorry, it's a lunatic notion by the left that somehow we're going to power our $23 trillion, U.S. industrial economy with windmills. It's the stupidest thing.
It's an energy source of serfs. I mean, isn't that what kept us back in the dark ages? I mean,
exactly.
This is wild.
Yeah, this is like the Middle Ages energy policy of using windmills and solar sun panels. We should be using all of our energy. We should be using our coal. By
Yeah.
the way, China right now, Dana, as we speak, is building 100 coal plants. Do you think they care about climate change?
Yeah, we're just outsourcing it there and pretending, that we're clean because we can't see our pollution. Talking with Stephen Moore.
That's
One
right.
last thing for you. I was looking at this general license that U.S. Treasury issued, exempting any energy-related dealings from sanctions imposed on the biggest
Yes.
Russian banks.
Yes.
It was so wide-ranging that it even included wood. And I was looking at these carve-outs because Italy wanted to carve out for luxury goods. Germany wanted certain exceptions. Hungary wanted certain exceptions. I really get the sense that some of these states, some of these countries are not serious about this. And it just seems like this is just kabuki theater. This isn't real.
So, yeah, while you were speaking, I was looking up because I was reading the Wall Street Journal lead editorial this morning.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Putin's New World Disorder. And I'm going to read this paragraph because it's exactly the point you were making. They say that they were talking about here how, here it is. They say, notably, that is Biden, mentioned no sanction on Mr. Putin's main financial lifeline, which is energy exports. And then it says, this is a bow to Europe's dependence on Russian gas, but it's also a sign of weakness. Mr. Putin's windfall from $100 a barrel oil offsets any sanctions. So we're not even hurting them. I mean, this is outrageous.
That's shameful. I really think I know they announced the SCOTUS pick today. I hope that Senate drags their feet on any advise and consent until we get serious about sanctioning this energy
one last
sector.
point, Dina. I've got to say, I worked for Donald Trump. I didn't always agree with everything he did, but I do believe in everything that he did was always about putting America first. I'm not so sure this president does that.
Oh, I'm certain that this president doesn't at all. I'm certain of it. I can say that with 1,000% confidence. So I do agree with you.
Well, when you look at what he's done in the last, few weeks and months, you'd have to say this is putting Russia and China first, not the United States.
Well, maybe he's worried about hurting Hunter Biden's job prospects. I mean, that could always be a consideration. Stephen Moore, always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. His book, Trumponomics: Inside the America First Plan to Revive Our Economy. Stephen, always appreciate it.
Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.